there is nobody I know who has done like a better job of just being an amazing connector, Susan. And I have tracked your career, and I know we're connected in various social media now for years. And what I love about your approach is that you come to the table with a generous spirit, and it comes across in everything that you do. And I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about when you first figured out that this was your superpower, that connecting was your superpower.
Well, it goes way back. I hate to tell you. I'm 56. And honestly, I learned the art of connecting in the late 60s, early 70s at my kitchen table. I had parents who were very much what we now call serial connectors. Every morning at the breakfast table, I would vie for real estate for my bowl of cereal or toast with honey, while they would spread out the 5 local newspapers plus yesterday's New York Times. Because when you lived in upstate, if you wanted the New York Times delivered, it wouldn't come until the next day. And they'd be sitting there with their razor blade or a kitchen scissors and literally clipping articles, putting them in envelopes, typing up quick, manually typewritten notes saying, thinking of you, Cousin Harry, thinking of you, colleague Joan. My mother did PR for public television. So thinking of you, reporter John, and inevitably it was a male at that point in time. So this was what I saw every day. And I assumed when I got into college and into the professional world that everybody did that.
Yeah.
And in the late 80s, early 90s, something appeared in my office, and it was a fax machine. And all of a sudden, I could do this instantaneously. But I made it my calling card to actually be thoughtful about others. And it's not because I'm just this remarkable human being. It's the only way I've ever known to operate. Right. And therefore, when I would see things, think of things, I would use that to reach out.
Yeah.
And I'll still do that today.
I love that. And, it's so interesting that when I saw your book and I saw what you were planning, you had been talking about it on social media a little bit, and I saw the title, I thought this is the kind of book that I needed, because I have seen these, here's how you network. And you say the word go network to somebody like me, and I get a pit in my stomach.
You should.
And when I thought more about that, I thought, why can't people just talk about it like you're trying to build a relationship with someone, you're trying to connect with somebody? And then you came out with this book that is all about that lost art of connecting. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to connect now and why you thought there was something missing and how people were connecting, given where we are today with the digital age?
Sure. And there is a reason the book is called The Lost Art of Connecting versus The Lost Art of Networking. And I am not anti-networking. There is a need to network. We will always have to do those proverbial rubber chicken dinners when we finally come back to some semblance of whatever normalcy will be. But what I'm talking about is building deep, meaningful relationships that last and stand the test of time. So just a little background. The book, the thesis, the proposal was all done long before the pandemic. And it was done in my reaction to the fact that we had gotten to the point where everything was about clicks and likes and followers, rather than going deep and meaningful. Okay. We would be measuring our own success, myself included. Okay. I'm not absolving myself from this. And I thought that there's something really wrong with that. And I don't know about you, Elisa, but when I was a kid and I would get on the bus, I would talk to the people around me. I would probably be running away from the bullies on the bus too, but you would be communicating with others. You'd be connecting with others. And I thought to myself, this is not a good thing. So I put forth a proposal of an idea about using my gather, ask, do method to bring us back, to really recapture. The only challenge is I started to write in February, and then March, the world closed down, and all we had were clicks and likes and followers to connect.
Wow. Yeah. And okay, so I want to talk more about how the pandemic, because in a lot of ways, I think your book is even more critically needed now because of what's happened for people during the pandemic. Can you talk though, before we get into that, can you talk about Gather, Ask, Do?
Sure.
Because it's a really interesting and I think useful framework.
Yeah.
So I would love if you could share how that works.
Sure. And thank you for that prompt. That's lovely of you. Gather, Ask, Do is a methodology that can be used today, tomorrow, next year, whenever. Certainly helpful during times in your life when you're going through change, when you're looking for a new job, when you're starting a new job, when you're moving to a new city. But it actually has a lot of practicality to now, when we are almost what I term, we're in purgatory, right? Mm-hmm. We're seeing the kind of glimmer of hope, but yet, and we can taste it and feel it, but we're not there yet. Yeah. So Gather is when you actually think, first of all, and this is something all the listeners right now can do, is what is a meaningful relationship to you? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because what is a meaningful relationship to me may be very different than you, Aliza, as well as your sound engineer, Madison. Mm-hmm. So I want everybody to think about that. Mm-hmm. Secondly, what is the community you want to build around yourself that's going to help you reach your goals, whatever they may be, in the next 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks, hell, 4 days, okay? I want to be very intentional about that. I want you to think about, how am I going to help make that community more vibrant and diverse and maybe look a little less like me? Mm-hmm. And lastly, I want you to think about, what is the secret sauce? What is it that you and only you offer up to the world? Mm-hmm. And everybody has secret sauces. And in the book, I call it your chief differentiating factor. Yeah. That's Gather. Ask is a little bit different than what you might be thinking, because, and especially as women, we tend to sometimes not ask for what we need, deserve, and want. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's learning to ask the right questions so that you can understand what's going on in someone else's life. Right. What are their hopes and dreams? What is going on? What are they finding challenging? Yeah. And if you listen carefully and go so far as maybe making notes when you're listening, you have all the tools you need to go to the do. Yeah. And the do is when you be you and introduce them to other people, connect them to other people, follow through and help them in whatever they mention might be needed. Yeah. And therefore, you become responsible, helpful, dependable, and probably really importantly, trustworthy. Yeah. So this is not something you have to do every moment of every day, but it's a framework that you can then use when you are building your connections going. Yeah. I do think, though, that one of the elements that you talked about is one that we hear from women that they struggle with, yes, which is the idea of figuring out what really makes them special. And this idea of, I think it's connected to self-awareness. As women, I think we are hard on ourselves. We don't necessarily think, oh, here's what I'm good at. We think of, oh, I didn't do this well. I didn't do that well. But how can someone become more self-aware? Well, it's a really important question. And I have to be honest, because I have monkeys in my brain. I have imposter syndrome. There are days that I wake up and I think, oh my God, I'm a failure. I mean, and I say that because it's inherent and it's an endemic in I think our species. Yeah. But I will say that it was probably once I passed 50 that I got a little bit more of that, what the, you know what, right? Mm-hmm. And I started to just dig in and see, you know what, I do have some special powers. In 2007 or 8, I was definitely not happy in my current job, and I was going away with 7 other girlfriends, and we went up to the Catskills, which, for those of you who don't live in New York State, it's a beautiful area, a few hours north of New York City. And our goal that weekend was to actually come up with our elevator speeches. Speeches, and or essentially really be able to hone and enunciate and articulate our secret sauce. Mm-hmm. And it was that weekend that I came up with Susan McPherson is a serial connector. Okay. When I said that, I literally peed in my pants. It sounded so ridiculous. Yeah. I was like, who the hell says that? But it was true. Yeah. And the 7 other women I was with gave me the power to like own it. But I still, and then it wasn't until a few years later when I was introduced on a stage and I was brought up on the stage and they said, and we welcome Susan McPherson, serial connector and blah, blah, blah. I still peed in my pants. I mean, not literally, but I honestly, it sounded, again, but guess what? Fast forward to 2021, I wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the moral is, you know what? You may have a strength now. It may change in 3 or 4 years, but dig deep. Okay. Be amazing at making tomato sauce. Own it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I know I'm being silly when I say that, but we all have gifts, and I'm happy I finally figured out what mine was. Yeah. It might have happened a little later than I wanted, but you know what? It's all good.
Sometimes other people can see things for us. Our friends can see things for us that we don't necessarily see for ourselves. And they can be kinder to us than we are to ourselves, right? And the voice that's in our head is the one that we listen to. But if you surround yourself with women and people who are supportive of you, they can make all the difference in the world. Can you talk about how women have played a role for you in your life?
Well, all the way, from my mom to my sister to my aunts to I would be nowhere without the women and the friends that I have made, and colleagues. But I'll be honest with you. I also had the meanest, most horrible women bosses in the 90s. I came of age professionally at a time where, a woman would get ahead and, break the glass ceiling and then shut the glass ceiling behind her. And one of the reasons I have made it my practice to almost always say yes. And I realize a lot of people don't have the time. I get it and I understand it, but I will make the contention that the point is the collective data from which you can pull from is so much deeper and richer. So that when somebody comes to you and says, you know what, I need somebody who's an expert in climate change or ocean plastics, you probably know the person who can be helpful.
So what are some things, some smart things, if you maybe can give like 1 or 2 anecdotes, because I'm big on stories. I think that people remember stories. If you could give 1 or 2 examples of what are good things to do when you're trying to connect with somebody.
Right. First of all, do your research. All you have to do is go to the Google. Okay. All right. Simply, and in the book, I talk about literally being able to write somebody's Oscar speech before you reach out. You don't have to do that. Yeah. But the thing is, if you want to be taking somebody's time to connect with them for your own benefit, then there needs to be something that you need to put in. Okay. It's the way of the world. And always lead with, how can you be helpful? 3 things. Do your research, lead with a bit about them, but also with the caveat or the wrapper of, how can I be helpful?
Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit more about what you were like as a child. You're giving us little glimpses, but what kind of child were you that you have sort of blossomed into this amazing connector who, knows how to make things happen?
But whenever I would see children sitting by themselves, whether it was at camp or at school, I always would go and talk to them regardless. And, when I would see a bully being bullied, I would inevitably I wasn't just a bystander, in other words.
Yeah.
And I probably got myself in trouble a few times being that person that stepped in, because I was like all of like 40 pounds or 50 pounds. Sadly, had a horrible tragedy when I was 22. My mother was killed in a hotel fire. But when she was taken from this earth, it almost like the worst thing that could ever happen happened. Yeah. And so it prepared me in some ways to take on risks that I might not have ever done, because I would tell myself the worst has already happened. So what else could happen? Lord knows bad things have happened since, but not to any of that extent. And so and also just watching her, having worked for public television versus, and I used to say, Mom, how come you don't work for ABC or CBS, which there were only a few networks back then. And she would say, because the content is far superior in public television. So that instilled this notion of giving, doing good. And lastly, my father taught at a women's college for 40 years.
Wow.
And that instilled in me this, like, women deserve, women have to speak up, women have a seat at the table. Right. So, it was a really interesting balance. And I'll add just one more thing. We were a Jewish family in a sea of Protestant and Catholicism. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like we were like the weird family. We had weird food. We had weird holidays. I didn't know anybody else who was like that. So it did help me, I think, again, understand a little bit of what it's like to be othered. I would never compare my experience to people of color in this country by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to be very clear about that. But it did build that sense of kind of empathy.
How do you deal with failure? Because inevitably, you mentioned as you were talking that your experiences helped you become more of a risk taker because you figured, well, the worst thing that could have happened has happened. So I'm going to, why not try and why not, go out there and take a risk? But with that, when you're a risk taker, failure is part of that. And I know a lot of people fear failure.
Yeah.
But as a risk taker, you probably don't. But I'm curious to hear how you deal with failure.
Well, first of all, I understand now when you fail, it's much easier to get a TED Talk. So to me, it's like it's a badge of honor now. I've had multitudes of failures, and of course, again, I'm human. I get scared. I think one of my biggest failures was staying at a company way too long. I worked for PR Newswire for 17 years. And I think about, oh my God, what else I could have done had I left early. And, I do think just as you age, the fear of failure lessens only because you don't have so much time left, right? And so, in other words, risk failure. And it's like, well, if I only have this much time left, it sure as hell bloody take it.
Yeah.
I also will say my late father armed me with one kind of mantra that I often use, and I still to this day, nothing is a prison sentence, unless it's a prison sentence.
Right.
Knock on wood, that hasn't happened to me. But that has enabled me to kind of put that fear at bay because I always realized if I made the wrong choice or if I did something I shouldn't have done, if I've built meaningful relationships, I can open or reopen doors.
Yeah. I would love if you could talk a little bit about the work that you're doing there and also what the entrepreneurial experience is like for you.
Well, I first should tell you that it was founded on a lark. I had left PR Newswire in 2010. I went to work for a boutique consulting firm to create their corporate responsibility practice. And about 3.5 years in, there was a mass exodus of talent. And for anybody listening or watching who have worked in the consulting world, when people are exiting a firm, it's like danger. It means you have to figure out what's next because a consulting firm is only as good as its people.
Yeah.
So I knew it was time to start looking, and I didn't want to make the same mistake of staying forever and then options would just start closing in. And 2 organizations, Global Citizen Year and Girl Rising, people who worked at both organizations said, Susan, if you leave, we will give you a 3 to 4 month consulting gig.
Wow.
I was like, there, I got to start. So 8 years later, here I am, still wanting a vacation. But so that's how. And then I joke, I named it McPherson Strategies because it was a placeholder. It's my husband's name. Good guy, great guy, but we divorced in 2003. Okay, go figure. So that is how I founded my entrepreneurship journey. Now, 8 years later, 98% of our business has been inbound.
I'm sorry, 98% what?
98% of the business has been inbound.
Wow.
Another reason why I wrote this book, because that meant all those connections in my 20s and 30s. indirectly or directly came back.
So the entrepreneurial thing was a bit of an accident,
Yeah.
but now that you're doing it, what do you find different about the emotional element? This is one of the things that I love talking to entrepreneurs about, because, you know, I personally, I've only done two things. I worked in corporate America at the same company for 10 years, and then I started my own business. So I've only done two things my entire career. And I thought I worked hard when I worked in corporate America. But there is a difference, right, when you start your own business, because of the share of mind, right? It's just, it's almost like a baby. It becomes part of who you are, and you care for it in a different way. So the emotional element is quite different.
Well, I always, I was one of those people. I always took my jobs very, very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And and this comes out in the book. There's not a work Susan and a home Susan.
Mm-hmm.
And that existed in my corporate role too. And quite frankly, it grew out of, it was exhausting being two people. And I found that it would just be so much easier to be one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe that has helped me be a better business owner. But I think, yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, I would have to agree with you, Lisa. It does become part of you. And the analogy would be a garden, right? I mean, a garden isn't going to grow if you don't feed it and care for it and nurture it.
Right.
And a business has to be the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And the day you get to a point where you basically anoint someone else to do that, it becomes a very different thing.
Of all of the things that you've accomplished, and there's so many things that you have been, you've been so successful doing. What are you most proud of?
Well, surviving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we're just going to be very, very me focused, I think, I would have to say creating a culture of goodness in an entrepreneurial format that has created jobs for now soon to be 13 individuals. I would also have to say that the whole all my volunteer work, the work that I've done on behalf of supporting refugees, being able to obviously I feel privileged that I've been able to go to various refugee camps and refugee hotspots to actually have a deeper, greater understanding. To me, that is extraordinarily, I mean, that first of all, it's a gift, but it's also has helped me be that much more empathetic, that much more compassionate, and that much more able to be supportive of others. And there's 88 million displaced people in the world. So if I can be doing just a little bit to support them, then so be it.
Well, and I love that you brought this up, because I know you've been doing work for the UN can you talk a little bit about the volunteer work that you do, just so people understand, and also the significance of what it brings for you? Because I think that's another thing that people think, well, do I have time to do that? But there's so much that it brings in terms of benefit. If you could talk about what is the work, and then what value is it bringing to you?
Sure. Well, and I talk a bit about in the book this notion of, how do we get out of our bubbles? How do we meet people that are not just like us? And one of the ways I have found in the last 30 years professionally is whenever I move to new towns, new cities, is I get involved in local community organizations, whether it be a nonprofit, whether it be a civic organization, so that I can learn obviously what's going on locally, but also meet people who are different from myself. And then professionally, by getting involved and inevitably, years later, being able to join the boards of nonprofits, I've learned actually a lot about running, businesses. I mean, they're nonprofit organizations, but they are still, have balance sheets, and they have to meet budgets and all of that, and they have to raise money. So just having those opportunities have helped me run my own company. Let alone, things that I never would have known before. And so right now, for instance, I serve on the board of USA for UNHCR, which is the US arm of the UN High Commission for Refugees, the board of the 19th, which is a nonprofit newsroom that is centered around the intersection of women and public policy. And it was founded a year ago by the original editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. And then the Lower East Side Girls Club, which is a local organization here in New York City, which is providing, basically everything from an entrepreneurial education to experiences, et cetera, for the girls that live, and now because of the pandemic, they've expanded obviously to all of New York City, but who live in the Lower East Side.
One last thing, because I
Yeah.
have to ask.
Yes.
As we are moving out of this pandemic, when you think about the idea of connecting and human beings connecting, what do you think the lasting effect will be of the past year on how we connect as human beings?
Yeah. Well, honestly, and that maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I do believe because we've had this year of isolation,
Mhm,
this notion of meaningful relationship, the
mhm,
importance of it,
mhm.
the meaning of it actually is now going to be that much more important. That
Yeah.
we won't take people that we meet for granted, and that we might kind of be less likely to be just like numbers and glad handing, but actually build more meaningful
Yeah.
relationships. And again, I'm an eternal optimist, so maybe I'm a little drinking too much of the Kool-Aid, but we've never had an experience like this, and God hope we don't have another one anytime soon. But I
Mhm.
believe that if anything, these relationships are what matter more than anything.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love the optimism because that's what we have, right? We have, I mean, we ascribe meaning to things, right? Things happen and we then ascribe, it's not, someone said to me the other day, it's not mind over matter, it's mind over meaning. And it made so much sense to me because the things are going to happen and they're going to be catastrophic things that happen. They're going to be positive things that happen. What we can do as human beings is put meaning on them. So I love that you bring optimism. That is, it's a gift.
Thank you.
How can people be in touch with you?
On all the socials, you can find me at Susan McP1. Super easy.
Awesome.
And you can email me at susan@mcpstrategies.com. And you can find information about the book at thelostartofconnecting.com. And then, of course, my company's name is McPherson Strategies. We are hiring if you know of people, men and women, and
Yes. Anyone who qualifies.
yes.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Susan. I love talking with you.
Oh, it's been a joy, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.